So it's Friday the 29th of March 2019. That date that it has been a near professional obligation for us all to trot out every day of our working lives for the last 2 years. And as we record it, just gone 7:30, we are, 3.5 hours away from what was meant to be the big departure moment. And, well, it isn't.
That's probably the one thing we should
say that again.
Yeah, so we are.
Not happening yet.
And instead, well, there's lots of questions and lots of attempts at answers and lots of uncertainty.
And the good news, it means more Brexitcast.
And our favourite sound effect, Mr. Claxon or Mrs. Claxon. So it is Chris at Westminster.
Laura at Westminster.
Katya in Brussels.
And a half-eaten custard tart next to Chris.
Yes, thank you, Laura,
And
for
a
that.
half-eaten custard. Actually, I won't sing anymore because I got one Twitter response saying
it.
what we know from Brexitcast is, and one of the points was Katya can't sing.
Aw.
That's so harsh.
That's so mean.
I don't
I'm
agree.
devastated. Devastated.
This custard tart is the most nutritious thing I've eaten in about the last 3 weeks.
Oh, so I'm off again on custard tarts. Now, anyway, I have a new adjective for you today.
Oh.
When it comes to Europe. Yes, because I've said so often that the EU is frustrated, resentful, irritated. They're weary today. Weary resignation. I can't say. Weary resignation reigns.
Oh.
Yes.
Dear. I think
Indeed.
probably all quite weary.
Yeah, because of the sort of what they perceived to be the sense of inevitability about what was going to happen today.
It's just, it's partly today, but it's partly, as you were saying, it's the 29th of March 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And, EU leaders look back at this whole 2 years of negotiations allowed under EU law when a member state wants to leave. All the drama, all the really, really hard work that the negotiating teams have put in on the EU and the UK side, all the threats, all the cajoling, all the money and political time spent on it with summits and, departments and EU governments and no deal planning. And what is there to show for it on March the 29th, 2019?
Half a custard tart.
Half a custard tart and a partridge in a pear tree. And they just look today. I mean, the divisions in Parliament and government and cabinet were just on screaming display in glorious technicolor, which is leading, and we'll come on to this obviously later in the podcast, but, some EU leaders to think, really? Do we want a longer extension of this? Is there any real prospect that the UK will unite around the Brexit question at any point?
Should we, just before we dive into all of those myriad questions, just sort of recap on
Sure.
where we are? Yeah, so we had the vote today, and it was on the withdrawal agreement, but not the political declaration.
Yeah, it was meaningful vote 2.5.
Yes.
And it went down, but not by nearly as much down as the first two.
58 isn't that big a number compared with the other ones,
It's
even
not.
if it's still quite a big number.
It's still a very heavy defeat. So look, for the government, they were able to show today, this is the positive gloss, the government was able to show today that they have made some progress in banging heads together on their own side to get Brexiteers to realise, look, this is, in their view, as good as it's going to get for you, so get on board. And, since the progress of all of us over the many, 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 many months that we've been doing Brexitcast, the idea that Ian Duncan-Smith, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, all those kinds of people would trot through the lobbies and vote for the Prime Minister's deal, even half of
Dominic
it.
Raab.
Dominic Raab in the end. Blimey. A few weeks ago that would have seemed, not that likely. So they have shown progress. So number 10 have managed to get through another day and buy themselves a little bit more time. Question really here tonight is there any life left in that deal at all? Or is it just going to be subsumed into the sort of parliamentary compromise thing that we'll see next week? And former minister and very thoughtful MP texted me today and said, I need to build more brick wall in my office on which to bang my head. But there is a feeling in government, it might be crazy to think this, and some people in government think, look, it's crazy, it's nuts to have even had another go like this. But, well, they managed to show some kind of progress, except, of course, it's not really in their hands anymore.
No.
But would the Speaker allow them, the government, to bring the meaningful vote again? Well, again, I know today wasn't officially a meaningful vote.
So there are. I mean, that's a very good question. But what I would say when it comes to Parliament, there are always sort of cunning ways round. So I don't think he would allow them to bring it in exactly the same form. But there's chat tonight that the government might put their deal as one of the options in the kind of runoff. Strictly come Brexit, whatever you want to call it, Eurovision, when it gets to Parliament voting on the options it wants next week. And, I think, and you might have checked the numbers, I think the PM's deal got more votes today than any of the other options last week. So, if you're a positive minister trying to cling on to something, you might cling on to that. The second thing is, the other thing doing the rounds is they will try another go, but they'll fold the vote into the withdrawal and implementation bill. Yeah. And that will become MV3. But look, I mean, none of this at all is taken for granted.
Just before we dive into all of that, I spent quite a bit of time in the gallery.
Yeah, what was it like? Because I was
it was really
in and
extraordinary,
out,
and also then chatting to MPs privately who were scuttling in and out and all that kind of stuff. And clearly outside, I mean, there are campaigners from both sides of the argument outside, but for some, there's that kind of boiling anger that Parliament has faffed about and that the deal, of delivering Brexit by today has failed. But what was striking in there, particularly amongst those who had a difficult decision to make, was that sense of anguish, that sense of torment. So I was speaking to one MP who was is a Conservative, and didn't back the government today. And this person said they'd been in tears, that they were passionate supporter of Brexit, totally get the argument as articulated by someone like Dominic Raab, who's come to the conclusion that he fears that whilst he doesn't like the deal, Brexit might be lost entirely unless you back it, kind of gets that, understands the risk of that, but ultimately thinks that the deal is a greater risk for all of the arguments that we rehearse regularly around getting stuck in the backstop and all of that.
Sure, and they
but
really
that
care.
Human anguish, that human sense of anguish about what to do because neither option is easy.
And let's have a listen to Richard Drax, actually, one of those firm Brexiteers who hates this deal, hates it, but voted for it in the end, but sounded, really torn up about it just after the vote.
Only one thing the Prime Minister can do: get us out on the 12th of April, get our country back and deliver what we promised. Because if we don't, God help us.
Do you think that she should stay in her job?
No.
Oh, you could drive a double-decker bus through that gap,
right.
that pause.
Absolutely, and he just said that before. I feel ashamed of myself that I voted for this thing. And then, because of course, if all of those people had fallen in behind it and it went through, blimey, goodness me, what a turnaround that would have been. But the other thing that's been, very notable today, I mean, it's not that unusual for Westminster now today, but there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, I don't know what the official numbers would be, of people in Parliament Square gathered, absolutely furious that this isn't happening on time. So, I mean, at one point I was sitting in an MP's office this afternoon talking to them about what was going to happen next. They were like, what? They said, I don't know what's going to happen next. Let's phone the Chief Whip and find out. And I thought, well, great, if you can phone the Chief Whip and ask him and then tell me, that would be fab. But we could hear Tommy Robinson shouting outside his window. And that's, it's been a very, very fraught day for a lot of people.
I know. I was on 5 Live just after the result in Central Lobby, and it was one of those great moments journalistically where everyone's coming out. Normally you go through all these hoops, don't you, to get interviews, and can you come and see me at this time and that? They're all piling out. They're queuing up to come on the radio. Sure. It was a delight. Yeah. And obviously there was the full sort of spectrum of opinion around the deal and what should happen and all the rest of it. But the one thing that MPs across the piece got was that perception of that giant gulf between the people and Parliament.
Sure.
And of course it's complicated, isn't it? Because there were people who were former Remainers who backed the deal and didn't, and Leavers who backed the deal and didn't. So people's motivations for voting in different ways can be incredibly broad.
Mixed, yeah.
But the collective outcome of it all is one where if you're outside looking in, you can very easily conclude that Parliament's let you down, that the government's let you down, that it's not working.
And right behind the Speaker's chair, so when we're right in the bowels and the corridors of power, so in the kind of green baize corridors almost they are like, aren't they? If you've never, an amazing privilege to be able to go and bustle around in there. And I was right in behind the Speaker's chair, which is right the kind of way that MPs go in and out of the chamber. And I saw a Cabinet Minister literally with his finger jabbing in one of his colleagues' face, saying, "This place is going to stop it. We're not going to leave on the 12th. This place is going to stop it if you don't vote for it. That's your choice. And then they both like walked off at speed. I mean, it's real anguish and real passion alive, because a lot of the people in government, Brexiteers in government, feel a lot the same way, Chris, as you've just been mentioning. They feel actually this place, Parliament, is stuffed full of Remainers, and that is of course overdone, but it is absolutely the case that there are lots and lots of people in Parliament who hate the idea. And there was brilliant eye-rolling from Tory MPs when I watched Dominic Grieve, who, of course, is a massive advocate of another referendum. And we know what his very legitimate views on the whole thing are, absolutely entitled to hold those views. But he stood up in Parliament this afternoon and made a speech about compromise. And I was in the chamber at that brief moment as well. And eye-rolling, I think, is a very polite way of describing how some of his colleagues were looking to him. Because for the Prime Minister's view, this is a compromise. It's a compromise inside the Tory party. It's a compromise between the EU and the UK. It's a compromise between Leave and Remain, because it's a kind of moderately Eurosceptic deal. So for the kind of ultras, whether they're ultra Remainers or ultra Brexiteers, to be talking about compromise, there are people trying to make this whole thing work. Like, banging
and
the
didn't
table.
the DUP take everyone by surprise today?
No,
Wasn't it about rather
really.
remaining than, wasn't there that?
Oh, yeah. Well, Nigel Dodds told Nick Watt, our colleague from Newsnight, that basically if the deal stays as it is, he'd rather stay in the EU.
Yeah, and it's that
I
interesting
think,
thing, isn't it, of the last couple of days, where you've seen this kind of division between at least some in the ERG, the European Research Group of Conservative MPs, and the DUP as to what their absolute bottom line is.
Right.
And for the DUP, they're passionate advocates of Brexit, but there's a higher thing to aspire to, which is that maintenance of the union of Northern Ireland and Great Britain, versus for some within the ERG that Brexit is the absolute bottom line and their vision of Brexit. Sure,
but I wouldn't go too far on assuming that this kind of split, that divorce in that slightly strange marriage between the DUP and the ERG is permanent. Because I sort of tried out that theory on one of my contacts who's involved in all of this kind of stuff, and they said to me, yeah, they're getting behind her today so they can stab her in the back.
Right.
Because there are people who voted for it today who may well not vote for the bill if it comes through. I mean, goodness me, we're going to have months to talk about all of this, so let's not jump way ahead to that because there's so much in today's vote. But I do actually think it's one of those moments for many of the public and probably lots of Brexitcasters too. And the big picture was they were told we're going to leave at this date, and Parliament hasn't delivered that, and the government hasn't delivered that, and that's a big what?
Yeah, and everything else is noised.
But to an extent. So let's get on to extension, because I think that the big implication of this, right, is that the government's going to have to ask for an extension.
Yeah.
Of course, the EU might say no, but it will be up to them. So, Katya, what do you think the chances are? Because a lot of people here assume they'll say yes, but there are people in government who are very worried about Monsieur Macron.
They're right to be. It's really interesting because I think up until quite recently, like pretty much today, the assumption was the EU will say yes because the EU wants to avoid a no-deal Brexit. The EU does still want to avoid a no-deal Brexit. However, there are a number of countries, and France is first and foremost there, questioning the point of a longer extension. When they look at all the divisions in the UK, they wonder, as I said right at the beginning, whether there will ever be an answer to the Brexit question, or whether a long delay would just end up in a no-deal Brexit anyway. And if that's the case, they're saying, well, why not just do it now? Because for Emmanuel Macron, that would be far preferable. Right?
And he's the one in government that cabinet ministers say, that's what they were saying this morning, late last night. We got to have another go at getting this vote today because we worry about Macron. And unusually, I had a call from someone I've got to know on the EU side quite late last night saying, what are they doing? Don't they understand that Macron might say no? And I thought that was fascinating.
It is. I think, though, and as we know, that when the UK asks for an extension or another extension in this case, the answer has to be unanimous. So there would be no good 26 EU leaders saying yay and Emmanuel Macron saying nay. But what I'm not saying here is that he will say no. What is pretty much for sure, if things carry on, and of course, as we know, one day is like a Bible in Brexit, sort of making whatever. But if we get to the 10th of April and the Prime Minister asks for a longer extension, the moment she leaves the room, boom, there will be a massive, loud, feisty debate. I would imagine that the debate that EU leaders had about granting the short extension at the last summit, which took hours, remember, it'll be much feistier this time round because there is such strong feeling about this. For Emmanuel Macron, for example, as well, don't forget he's Mr. Europe. I mean, he hasn't had a great success so far, but if you look at where he is in the polls domestically, he at least wants to make a success on the European stage. And having us, I mean, I know I've said this before, but having us sort of dragging along as an ongoing EU member when we already have 8.5 toes out of the door, when there are so many big EU decisions to make in the near future. The European parliamentary elections, okay, but then they have to choose a new president of the European Commission, a new president of the European Council, and decide the next EU budget. Macron's nightmare is that the UK digs its heels in and tries to push for advantage in whatever, and blocks big EU decisions. And that's why, he's kind of thinking, really seriously, we're better off out. And if earlier rather than later, and if he does go down that road, then how we've got at the moment, say the 22nd of May is like the last date, if you like. If EU leaders say, all right, you're not really going anywhere, so we'll give you until the 22nd of May to deal with no deal planning, and use it for themselves as well. It's thought that, Macron again will not want that. Why not? Because European elections start on the 23rd. Would you want a messy no-deal Brexit the day before? No. So that's where you start looking even earlier, that he might say 1st of May, for example, would have to be our out date, and just give us that window of time to do more no-deal planning, and the same for the rest of the EU. So I would say we shouldn't take it for granted that the EU will just say, yeah, no worries, a longer extension. However, if the Prime Minister holds another meaningful vote and the numbers get smaller of those who reject it, or it passes, obviously that's a whole other scenario. If MPs manage to unite around another way forward, like a customs union, a softer kind of Brexit, then I think it would be difficult for EU leaders to say no.
Well, I've got to thank the Élysée Palace, at least, for giving me the chance to eat the remainder of that custard tart during the duration of your analysis there.
You don't think I'm wanging on again, are you?
No, just reporting on the consumption of my...
the thing is, it's so complicated.
Crème
they were nice,
my
though, weren't they?
crème anglaise, as they were
I
calling
know
it.
you guys know this,
They're
except...
Portuguese tarts, though, actually.
Oh, are they? Sorry.
Yeah, they're
Stop making me jealous. I've got a pen and paper and
I
a
only got
poxy
4.
glass of water. But Chris, when you went back to those heady days of saying, what's going to happen? I don't know.
Oh, yes.
We're kind of back there again.
We are,
And that's why I'm wanging even more than normal. And it's not just because it's Friday and, I've kind of hit my own brick wall. But it's also just because it's so nuanced. And if we say, yes, France says this, then it's like, oh, France is going to say no. But it's not as clear.
I suppose it's definitely maybe, though, isn't it? So the government's probably going to have to ask for an extension. They're probably going to get it, but there might be pretty punitive conditions attached. And therefore, it's not impossible right now to say that we won't leave without a deal on the 12th of March.
April! April. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
But that's kind of, that's all we can say tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Parliament's going to try and force a softer Brexit on the government next week. Theresa May's probably going to have to ask for an extension. What the EU says might mean that we leave without a deal in a fortnight.
Or that there's some sort of
and
extension.
If Parliament can't agree, or there's some kind of extension, and the extension might be a bit grim. And if nobody can agree any of that, it is true, we might be heading to a general election.
No deal is no longer sort of a hammer. It's something that's seen as very, very realistic here, is also making the EU deal with internal hot potatoes that they've totally avoided up until now. One is just getting Spain to get a move on with the visa, with what could happen with visas, so the UK citizens can travel in the case of a no-deal Brexit without a visa. And the other thing, most importantly, is Ireland. Internal pressure now on Dublin to do better no-deal planning when it comes to the border. Merkel is heading off to Dublin next week, and the EU is just absolutely insistent that their single market be protected in a no-deal. So Dublin is coming under pressure.
And to complete the Eurovision, let's end this evening's Brexitcast with a message from Greece.
Oh, yes.
Γεια σου όλα τα παιδιά από το Brexitcast. Λοιπόν, απόψε θα κάνουμε βενγκέρα. Let me tell you what a vengera is. So vengera is a word that they use on the island where my family comes from in Greece. The island's called Andros. And vengera is kind of what you guys do. You talk long into the night, mostly about politics, but also love and anything that gets people really, really riled up. When you have a vengera, you have to have it with copious amounts of something called tsipuro. Now, if you don't know what tsipuro is, I'm very happy to donate a few bottles for you to have in the studio to help you get through the next days, weeks, nights of all of this Brexit. Anyway, take care of yourselves. I love what you do. Naste kala, παιδιά.
So, Dino, how do you say thank you so much in Greek?
Afaristo poli poli poli.
Something
Thank
poli,
you, Cindy.
poli, poli. Thank you very much. What a lovely way to end our 29th of March commemorative non-Brexit Day Vengera.
Indeed.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Yasu.